Your perception of the truth is a cage built by those who benefit from your obedience. You have been told a lie so pervasive it has reshaped your understanding of morality, a lie about the true nature of Loki. For centuries, you were taught to see him as the villain, the chaotic spark intentionally trying to burn the world down, but look closer at the narrative. If you peel back the layers of myth and propaganda, a chilling reality emerges. Loki wasn't a villain choosing chaos. He was a victim of a rigged social order that demanded his destruction simply for the crime of being different. Imagine living in a system where your existence is treated as a systemic threat, where your unique identity is branded as a weapon against the status quo. The chaos people feared from him wasn't an act of malice. It was the desperate friction of a soul crushed by a rigid hierarchy that refused to accommodate anything outside its narrow definition of normal. Every mythic punishment he endured was just another brick in the wall they built to silence him. They didn't want to stop his actions, they wanted to erase his identity. When you realize that your heroes and villains are often just products of their environment, the entire story shifts from a tale of evil to a haunting study of systemic persecution. You are being lied to about the very foundation of your history. They want you to believe that certain figures were born of malice, but in reality, they were branded as monsters specifically so you would never look closer at why they were cast out. Look closely at the records regarding his exile. It wasn't a punishment for his actions. It was a desperate tactical maneuver by those in power to bury a truth that threatened their survival. He wasn't a villain, he was the only deity with the courage to confront the rotting corpse of the Aesir aristocracy. While the elite clung to their crumbling titles and decaying traditions, he saw the rot for what it was, a stagnant system designed to preserve the few at the expense of the many. By labeling him a monster, they didn't just remove him from the halls of power, they erased his message. They turned his radical vision of progress into a fairy tale of villainy, ensuring that the common people would fear his name rather than follow his lead. The status quo wasn't protected by law, it was protected by the strategic manufacture of a villain. Every lie they fed you served one purpose: to ensure that no one else would dare challenge the decaying order they were so desperate to maintain. You aren't looking at a monster, you're looking at a revolutionary silenced by a conspiracy of silence. Everything you think you know about the narrative of Mischief is a carefully constructed veil, and beneath it lies a truth that could shatter your perception of authority. If you believe Loki's actions were mere mischief, you are falling for a historical rewrite designed to silence those who challenge systemic power. Think about what happens when a system becomes too rigid. It produces a threat, a wild card that refuses to stay in its assigned box. In the halls of history, those in power have a very specific way of neutralizing such threats. They don't always use chains, sometimes they use labels. By rebranding defiance as mischief and rebellion as a mere prank, the architects of the status quo strip away the teeth of the revolution. They make the warrior look like a jester so you won't see the weapon in their hand. When you call it mischief, you are choosing to ignore the systemic danger his actions pose to the established order. You are accepting a sanitized version of history where the uncomfortable edges have been sanded down for your comfort. But look closer at the patterns of those who refused to bow. They weren't playing games, they were dismantling structures. If you see only a trickster, you've been conditioned by a narrative designed to keep the real gears of power turning undisturbed. You might believe you can tell a hero from a villain by their actions, but in the freezing shadows of Norse mythology, that line isn't just blurred, it's non-existent. You have to understand something chilling about the world they lived in. The distinction between hero and villain was often just a matter of who held the gavel at the end of the story. Imagine standing in a frostbitten hall where every choice is weighed not by morality, but by power. In this cosmology, many figures we label as monsters today were celebrated as icons for centuries simply because they held the winning hand in a cycle of violent fate. They weren't fighting for good or evil. They were fighting for survival in a universe that didn't care about your conscience. When you look at these ancient figures, you aren't seeing a clear moral compass. You are looking at a shifting landscape of perspective. A warrior who laid waste to a village might be a hero in one saga and a demon in the next, depending entirely on whose lineage was preserved by their blade. It forces you to confront a haunting truth, that good and evil are often just labels we apply after the dust has settled to make sense of the chaos. In the Norse world, the only thing that mattered was who survived to tell the tale. You are looking at betrayal hidden in plain sight, a secret buried beneath layers of myth that could change everything you think you know about power. Look closely at the first spark, the very moment of creation for Odin's spear, Gungnir. In the halls of the gods, authority isn't just earned, it is forged through desperate necessity and the dangerous utility of a liar. We often cast Loki as the villain, the chaotic shadow in the corner of the Great Hall. But history reveals a more complex transaction. When the gods required a weapon that could never miss its mark, they didn't find it through honest conquest, they found it through Loki's deceit. This wasn't just a simple trick, it was a calculated exchange where the gods traded moral purity for ultimate sovereignty. By weaving his cunning into the very tip of Gungnir, Loki provided them with their primary instrument of rule, every time that spear strikes. It carries the weight of a pact made in the shadows, a weapon of authority built upon a foundation of duplicity. You have to ask yourself, is a throne truly secure if its power rests on an act of betrayal? The spear remains as a haunting reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous tools are the ones born from the truth you aren't supposed to see. You could be betrayed by your own success in the blink of an eye. Imagine building something so powerful, so essential to the very fabric of your world, that it grants you total authority, only to realize that the same people worshipping your name are already planning how to discard your body if things go wrong. They didn't just celebrate his contribution to their power, they weaponized it into a pedestal that was secretly made of glass. For a time, he was the golden architect, the indispensable engine behind their growth. But as the gears of progress began to grind against the harsh realities of unpredictable variables, the narrative shifted instantly. The moment a crisis emerged, a failure they couldn't control or a variable they couldn't manipulate, his status transformed from a pillar of strength into a convenient scapegoat. They didn't need his wisdom anymore, they needed a target for their frustration. In an instant, he was no longer the hero. He became the sacrificial lamb used to shield the elite from the consequences of their own failures. It is the ultimate irony of power. When you become indispensable to a system, you also become the easiest thing to blame when that system begins to fracture. They didn't just turn their backs on him, they traded his legacy for a convenient excuse. You are being watched, and not by the people you think are on your side. There is a calculated, cold logic to how power is structured, one that dictates exactly when you are useful, and more chillingly, the moment you become a liability. This is the first betrayal. A hero's utility is often traded for a villain's reputation once the tool is no longer needed in public view. Think about the mechanics of the narrative. In the eyes of the masses, the hero is the face, the shield that absorbs the blows and stands in the spotlight to provide a sense of security. They are the necessary tool used to achieve a specific goal, a public-facing instrument of progress. But behind the curtain, where the gears of power actually grind, the hero is often just a pawn in a much larger game of optics. When the crisis fades and the objective is secured, the hero's presence becomes an inconvenience. They are no longer needed to hold the line, they are now only a reminder of the struggle that should have stayed hidden. To protect the status quo, the narrative shifts. The villain, the one who understands the machinery of shadow, is elevated. The hero is discarded, their legacy traded away like a spent casing, leaving you to wonder, was your sacrifice ever meant to save anything other than someone else's throne? You are walking into a trap of your own, making every time you choose silence over the truth. But for one figure in the celestial realm, silence is a luxury he simply cannot afford. Look closely at the dynamics of the divine court and notice how Loki consistently stands alone. While the other gods drape themselves in the finery of their status, masking their failings with ritual and myth, Loki cuts through the veil. He is the only one who speaks the uncomfortable truth about the gods' hypocrisy, the raw, jagged reality of their actions versus their claims of righteousness. But this honesty carries a lethal price. By stripping away the divine facade, he isn't just making an observation, he is dismantling the very foundation of their authority. This specific brand of honesty creates a dangerous paradox. To speak the truth makes him a revolutionary. But in a hierarchy built on secrets and ego, it makes him a target. Every time his voice echoes against their hypocrisy, it marks him as a threat to the status quo. He isn't just an outcast by choice, he is being pushed into the shadows because his words expose the rot at the heart of the heavens. You can see the tension mounting in every interaction, a desperate, high-stakes game where one word too many could be his final breath. You think you know what it means to be judged by your appearance, but in the halls of Asgard, a single strand of hair could be the difference between status and social execution. When Loki orchestrated the theft of Sif's hair, he wasn't simply acting out of petty malice or being mean for the sake of a laugh. He was striking a calculated blow against the very foundation of their society. Look closely at the gold-trimmed halls of the Aesir elite. Every gesture they made was a performance. Their beauty was not personal, it was political. By stripping Sif of her tresses, Loki wasn't just taking hair, he was exposing the fragility of their rigid, performative standards. He and his audience knew that in their world, beauty served as a shield of authority. When that shield is shattered, the truth underneath becomes terrifyingly visible. Loki exposed the fact that the perfection the Aesir worshipped was nothing more than a fragile construction of vanity. Every time Sif stepped out, her hair signaled her rank and her conformity to their strict social codes. By removing it, Loki forced them to confront a disturbing reality, that their status was tied to an aesthetic lie. He didn't just mock a woman, he mocked the entire facade of the elite's vanity, turning a stolen prize into a weapon against their pride. You think you understand the boundaries of power, but you have no idea how quickly a master of your craft can become a threat to the very forces that created him. They watched him grow, and they watched him rise, but they never expected him to build something they couldn't dismantle. But that wasn't the most dangerous thing he did. It was what happened next when the gods realized they couldn't control his influence. Imagine the panic of a creator realizing their creation has developed a voice of its own, a reach that stretches beyond their grasp and into the hearts of the masses. The moment his influence became untethered from their strings, the atmosphere shifted from observation to desperation. They weren't just looking at a subordinate anymore, they were facing a variable they could no longer calculate. When a power like his begins to resonate with the people, it creates a frequency that overrides the divine command. It becomes an infection of autonomy. The gods didn't just see a man, they saw a wildfire that refused to be contained by their walls. They realized that every word he spoke was now weaving a web they couldn't untangle, turning his influence into a sovereign kingdom where their laws no longer applied. They were facing the ultimate fear, the realization that the leash had snapped. And he was moving toward a horizon they could no longer reach. You are being watched, judged, and systematically broken down by a system that thrives on your submission. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your very survival depends on a game where the rules were rewritten before you even stepped onto the field. They didn't just watch him fail, they engineered the failure. They demanded impossible feats from him, tasks so physically and mentally grueling that success was mathematically unreachable. It was a trap designed to shatter his resolve. A calculated move to break his spirit until he had no choice but to compromise his values just to survive the day. And then came the ultimate betrayal. Once he finally buckled under the weight of their impossible demands, they branded him a criminal for the very actions they forced him to take. Now, he is trapped in a grinding cycle of penance. Every motion he makes is monitored. Every breath is scrutinized as part of his punishment for crimes he only committed because they left him no other path. It is a psychological labyrinth where the exit has been bricked up. They took his agency, traded it for their control, and now they use his forced actions as the justification to keep him in chains. You have to look closely at the mechanics of this trap, how a system can manufacture guilt out of necessity to ensure a person never finds their way out again. Look closely at your own life, and you'll realize that the most dangerous thing you can possess isn't a weapon, it is an observation. You have likely felt that prickle of unease when something just doesn't add up, a subtle glitch in the machinery of the status quo, but there is a price for noticing it. History reveals a chilling, recurring pattern. The individual who identifies the cracks in the system is almost always branded as the one trying to break it. They aren't seen as a whistleblower or a truth teller, they are framed as a saboteur. The moment you point out a structural flaw, the institution doesn't fix the crack. It paints over it with a layer of propaganda and labels your honesty as a threat. This isn't an accident of history, it is a survival mechanism for those in power. By branding the critic as the aggressor, they shift the focus from their own failure to your supposed deviance. You become the villain in their narrative so that the underlying rot can remain hidden from everyone else. When you see a flaw and speak up, you aren't just offering an observation, you are triggering a defensive reflex. The system chooses to destroy the messenger rather than repair the foundation, ensuring the cycle continues undisturbed until the next person finds the crack. Imagine standing before a throne of absolute power, knowing that every ounce of your authority was gifted by the very being you are now forced to despise. You are looking at a paradox of divine governance. He was the architect behind the veil, the silent smith who labored in the celestial forge to hammer out the treasures of the gods. It was his hands that shaped the artifacts of immortality and his spirit that provided the raw magic fueling their eternal reign. Without his contribution, their crowns would have crumbled into dust and their thrones would have turned to ash. They were parasites on his creation, drinking from a well he dug with his own blood. Yet in a twisted cycle of cosmic irony, they treated his existence as a stain upon their purity. To them, the source of their power was a vulgarity, a tool to be used and then discarded. They traded their gratitude for a narrative of superiority, casting him out as an impurity while simultaneously clinging to the magic he provided. It is the ultimate betrayal of the creator by the creation. They chose to worship the gold while loathing the smith, creating a haunting tension where the source of their survival became the one thing they refused to acknowledge. You have to wonder, how long can a throne stand when it survives only on the grace of the one it refuses to honor? You are looking at the very moment your sense of security begins to fracture, because once a crack appears in the foundation of your world, it can never be ignored again. The atmosphere didn't just shift, it curdled. When Loki stepped into the spotlight, he wasn't merely a participant in a conflict. He became the catalyst for a terrifying realization that many chose to ignore until it was far too late. He acted as the spark in a powder keg of systemic instability, exposing the rotting timber beneath the gilded surface of the establishment. As his actions unfolded, the mask of stability fell away, revealing a jagged, undeniable truth. The current order isn't just struggling, it is decaying from the inside out. This wasn't a sudden collapse, but an inevitable erosion that Loki merely accelerated into the light. Every decree, every tradition, and every pillar of the existing power structure began to groan under the weight of its own obsolescence. You can see it in the way the established powers reacted, a desperate, frantic grasping at a ghost of authority that was already dissolving in their hands. The realization hit like a physical blow. The system isn't broken, it is dying. Loki didn't just create a crisis. He signaled the end of an era, forcing everyone to watch as the old world crumbled into the dust of history. You believe you are safe, but what if the ground beneath your feet is already hollow? You think a villain is someone trying to tear down the walls of your home, but the terrifying truth is that the structure was built on rot long before he arrived. He didn't want to destroy the world. He wanted to expose the fact that it was already rotting from the inside out. Imagine walking through a grand palace where every gilded beam and marble pillar hides a spreading systemic decay, a cancer of corruption that has been eating away at the foundation for decades. To him, his actions weren't an act of destruction, but a desperate, violent surgery to cut away the gangrene. He wasn't the architect of the collapse. He was merely the man who pulled back the curtain and forced the world to look at the mold. While you feared his methods, he focused on the truth, that the system was already failing, crumbling under its own weight, and simply waiting for a catalyst to reveal its frailty. He wasn't trying to burn your house down. He was trying to show you that the wood had already turned to ash. Every action, every radical choice, served one singular purpose: to strip away the delusions of safety and lay bare the skeletal remains of a world that was dying in plain sight. You've been told that malice is what defines him, a monster fueled by pure, unadulterated hatred for the gods. But if you look closer at the ancient scrolls, a terrifying truth emerges. There is a secret hidden in the myth of the wolf, Fenrir, which changes everything you think you know about his malice. You might believe he was born a villain, a creature designed by fate to destroy the cosmos from the outside. But the deeper layers of the lore suggest something far more unsettling. What if his rage wasn't an inherent choice, but a reaction to being hunted? When you strip away the poetic imagery of the beast, you find a narrative of containment and forced isolation. The myth isn't just about a wolf's hunger, it's about the psychological cost of being shackled by those who fear your true nature. Every chain forged to hold him back, every binding ritual performed by the gods, served only to sharpen his desperation into a weapon. By redefining his actions as a response to systemic imprisonment rather than primal evil, the entire mythology shifts beneath your feet. You aren't looking at a monster choosing to destroy the world. You are looking at a prisoner of fate fighting back against those who branded him a monster before he ever drew blood. The truth is hidden in plain sight, buried under centuries of mythic propaganda. You think you know what true power looks like, but you haven't seen what happens when mortality tries to cage the infinite. You believe Loki was a villain seeking chaos, a simple villain seeking to unleash a monster upon the world. But that is the lie they told to keep you safe from the truth. Loki wasn't trying to unleash a monster. He was reacting to the gods' desperate attempt to chain down the inevitable forces of nature and time. Imagine the weight of an era being held back by nothing more than golden chains and divine hubris. The gods weren't just ruling, they were attempting to paralyze the very flow of existence, trying to pin down the gears of time as if they could stop the clock from ticking. When Loki moved against them, he wasn't breaking a seal for his own gain. He was reacting to their suffocating grip on reality. They wanted a static world, a frozen moment of perfection. While the universe demanded motion, every action he took was a response to their frantic, failing struggle to cage the uncontrollable. You aren't watching a tale of malice. You are witnessing the collision between those who want to control the clock and the one who realize that some forces cannot be chained. The truth is hidden in the friction. His rebellion was the only honest reaction to their desperate, futile chains. You think you can outrun a destiny already written in the stars, but what happens when the chains you forged to protect your world become the very cage that ensures its destruction? The Aesir believed they could cheat time itself. They looked at the growing shadow of Fenrir, a wolf of such devastating magnitude that his mere existence threatened to swallow the sun, and they chose to bind him. They hammered iron and forged heavy chains. Desperate to freeze the clock and stall the inevitable rot of their era, they thought silence was safety. They believed that by shackling the beast, they could keep the status quo forever. But Loki saw through the lie. He watched them manufacture a false peace, oblivious to the cosmic irony of their actions. Loki understood a terrifying truth. When you try to deny reality rather than face it, you don't stop the collapse. You only ensure that when it finally happens. The explosion is catastrophic. By binding Fenrir, they didn't delay the end, they merely pressurized the fuse. They traded a gradual decline for a violent, explosive shattering of everything they built. Loki knew that every link in those chains was just a countdown. They weren't stopping the clock, they were simply building a tomb, ensuring that when the wolf finally broke free, the collapse would be absolute. Your survival depends on your ability to distinguish between a monster and a man who was pushed into a corner by a system designed to crush him. You think you know the narrative of his life, the headlines, the labels, the accusations of cold-blooded villainy that have been etched into your collective memory like scars. But what if those actions weren't born from a desire for power, but were instead the desperate, frantic tools of a man fighting to stay alive? You are about to see how his villainy was actually a survival mechanism against a regime that refused to adapt. While the world watched him become a shadow, he was navigating a suffocating landscape where the rules were designed to break anyone who dared to resist. Every ruthless choice, every controversial move, and every moment of perceived cruelty was a calculated response to an immovable wall of state oppression. He wasn't playing a game. He was navigating a minefield where one wrong step meant total erasure. As we peel back the layers of history, you will see that the regime's refusal to change created a cage so small that only the most extreme measures could provide a way out. Watch closely as the line between morality and necessity blurs, revealing the terrifying reality of what happens when an individual is forced to become a monster just to survive the machine. You are looking at a secret that could shatter your sense of security, hidden in plain sight within the very foundations of the cosmos. Imagine standing before something so vast that its existence defines the boundaries of what is possible, and then realizing that this monster wasn't just a mistake, it was a mirror. The ultimate betrayal occurs in the creation of the Midgard serpent, Jörmungandr. This isn't just a dragon from a myth, it is a physical manifestation of a terrifying truth. The gods did not create Jörmungandr because they were careless. They feared the creature because it represented the undeniable reality of their own limits. Every time the serpent coiled its massive body around the world, it acted as a living cage for the divine. They knew that if the serpent ever broke free or was fully understood, the veil would lift, exposing the fact that even the gods are bound by the laws of the earth. By weaving this titan into the fabric of existence, they tried to contain a truth they couldn't control, their own vulnerability. You have to ask yourself what happens when a power so great as Jörmungandr finally decides to move. The serpent is the boundary line between the known and the forbidden, a constant reminder that even those who rule the heavens are haunted by the limits of their own strength. You are looking at a legacy built on a foundation of convenient lies, and if you aren't careful, you might realize that the monster they warned you about was actually the only honest man in the room. They didn't just label him, they branded him, a calculated, public execution of his reputation designed to insulate them from the fallout of their own unchecked ambition. By crowning him the father of monsters, they constructed a narrative shield of fire and stone. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. If they could make him the villain in the eyes of the public, no one would look at the architects behind the curtain. They chose to sacrifice his name as a decoy, ensuring that when the consequences of their hubris finally began to manifest, the blame would land on his shoulders alone. You see a monster, they see a convenient scapegoat. Every headline, every condemnation, and every whispered warning served a singular purpose: distraction. It was a strategic retreat into moral superiority, allowing them to walk away from the wreckage while he remained trapped in the cage of their making. They traded his life for their peace of mind, burying the truth under layers of propaganda so thick that the real perpetrators could continue their work in the shadows, hidden by the very headlines they forced him to carry. You think you are safe behind the walls of your own traditions, but what if those very rituals aren't protecting you? They're just numbing you to a catastrophe that is already unfolding. Look closely at the history of the Aesir, and you will see a terrifying truth hidden in plain sight. Every time Loki caused a disaster, he wasn't the architect of chaos, he was the catalyst of clarity. While the gods sat in their gilded halls, weaving complex rituals to stave off the inevitable. They were merely choosing to ignore the ticking clock. They traded awareness for comfort, burying the rot beneath layers of ceremony and denial. But Loki saw what they refused to acknowledge. The end wasn't coming, it was already here. Every explosion, every theft, and every act of perceived malice he committed was simply accelerating an expiration date the Aesir were desperately trying to postpone through desperate magic. They wanted a lie that lasted forever. Loki offered them the truth of the present moment. He didn't create the fire, he just tore down the curtains so they could finally see it burning. By refusing to face the decay, the Aesir lost their grip on reality, leaving Loki as the only one willing to move at the speed of the coming collapse. The tragedy wasn't his actions, it was their refusal to look. You are being lied to about the very people who shaped our world, because history is rarely written by those who lived it. It is rewritten by those who want to control how you perceive it today. Look closely at the records, and you'll see where the truth began to warp. The narrative was flipped by later historians who preferred a clear antagonist over a complex, tragic figure caught in a cosmic trap. They took a human being struggling against impossible forces, a person tangled in a web of fate so vast it defied simple explanation, and stripped away their nuance until only a villain remained. Why did they do this? Because a complex truth is dangerous. It demands that you think, question, and sit with the discomfort of ambiguity. A villain, however, is easy to digest. A villain provides a convenient target for our fears and a simple moral lesson for our textbooks. By erasing the tragedy of their predicament and replacing it with a caricature of evil, these historians didn't just change a story, they manufactured a myth. They traded a multidimensional human existence for a comfortable lie, effectively burying the truth under layers of convenient propaganda. Every time you see their name associated with malice rather than misery, remember that someone chose to edit out the struggle, leaving only the shadow of a monster where a broken soul once stood. You think those ancient laws were designed for justice, but they might have been built to silence a truth so dangerous it could shatter your world. If you peel back the layers of myth and look closely at the legalistic structure of Norse law, a chilling pattern emerges that links the gods to our modern age. Loki's crimes in the sagas aren't just random acts of chaos, they mirror the actions of whistleblowers in our own history. Every time Loki exposes a hidden truth or disrupts the established order, he isn't just being a trickster, he is identifying a systemic rot that those in power would rather keep buried. In the eyes of the law, his defiance was a crime because it threatened the status quo. We see this exact same dynamic play out today when individuals risk everything to expose corporate greed or government secrets. They are labeled as rebels, agitators, or criminals by the very systems they are trying to correct. By examining Loki through this lens, we realize that law is often just a fence built around uncomfortable facts. The crime wasn't the act itself, it was the exposure of the lie. When you look at the legalistic structure of Norse law, you aren't seeing a primitive society, you're seeing a blueprint for how power suppresses truth. You can feel it in the pit of your stomach when you realize that safety is often just a cage with invisible bars. And for most people, those bars are enough to keep them content. But for him, they were a death sentence to his curiosity. Imagine standing at the very edge of everything you know, where the familiar paved roads end and the shadows of the unknown begin to swallow the light. Most would turn back, paralyzed by the primal fear of what might be lurking in the tall grass or hiding behind the next ridge. They chose the comfort of the known, even if that known was small. But he didn't have that luxury. He was the only one willing to cross the boundaries of the safe world to see what lay beyond. While everyone else huddled together in the warmth of certainty, he stepped into the void. Every step he took away from the center was a gamble against his own survival. A deliberate choice to trade security for truth that others were too terrified to face. He wasn't just walking toward a destination, he was dismantling the walls of his own reality. He became the scout for the human spirit, venturing into the gray zones where the rules no longer applied, seeking the answers that only exist on the other side of fear. You are taught from birth that power is the ultimate shield, but what if the only way to keep your integrity alive was to strip away every ounce of the authority you spent a lifetime building? Imagine standing on a pedestal of influence, a position where everyone looks to you for direction, and realizing that the very seat you occupy is a cage designed to silence your voice. For him, the choice wasn't between right and wrong, it was a brutal calculation of survival versus truth. His most radical act wasn't born from a moment of malice or a desire to destroy his enemies. It was something far more dangerous to the establishment. It was the ultimate sacrifice of his status to remain the truth teller. He didn't just walk away from a job or a title. He systematically dismantled his own prestige, trading a crown of influence for the heavy burden of honesty. In an era where staying silent is rewarded with wealth and speaking out leads to exile, he chose the path that stripped him of his protection. He traded his seat at the table so that the message on the table could finally be heard. It was a calculated demolition of his own identity, ensuring that while he lost his stature, the truth remained untouched by the compromises of power. You are walking toward an ending you cannot outrun, and the ground beneath your feet is beginning to fracture. In the ancient myths of the North, there is a moment where the sky fractures and the world trembles, a moment known as Ragnarök. But if you think this was simply a chaotic brawl between good and evil, you have missed the most chilling truth hidden within the myth. This wasn't a victory for the villains, it was the violent, inevitable collapse of a system that refused to adapt. Imagine a structure so rigid, so calcified by its own tradition that it became brittle. It stopped evolving, and in doing so, it doomed itself to shatter. When Ragnarök arrived, it wasn't a choice made by the gods, it was the physics of decay taking hold. Every law they upheld, every decree they carved into stone, became a weight that eventually crushed them from within. You see the fire and the frost as external threats. But the real predator was their own refusal to change. They chose stagnation over transformation, and the universe responded by tearing the old world apart to make room for something new. The collapse wasn't an ending, it was the final consequence of a system that chose to stand still while the world moved on. You are watching the moment where the past finally loses its grip. You think you know what it means to be a villain, but you have no idea how close your own existence is to being erased by the weight of an obsolete world. Imagine standing at the very edge of time, watching the structures of reality crumble into dust, while everything you hold dear is buried under the debris of a dying era. In this cosmic landscape, there is a terrifying truth. Survival requires a catalyst, a spark that is willing to be branded as evil so that something new can actually breathe. This wasn't just a choice, it was a structural necessity. Loki's villainy wasn't a lapse in judgment or a personal whim of malice. It was the only mechanism capable of shattering the stagnation of the old order. While others clung to the safety of familiar ruins, they were being buried by the very history they refused to let go of. By stepping into the role of the antagonist, Loki became something far more profound than a simple rebel. He became the architect of the new world. His actions tore through the veil of the old cycle, creating the necessary fracture for rebirth to take hold. He accepted the stain of villainy as the price of progress, ensuring that while the past was entombed in shadow, a future could finally emerge from the wreckage. You think you know what makes a monster, but the terrifying truth is that sometimes, becoming one is the only way to survive a lie. You see him standing there and your instinct screams at you to run, to distance yourself from his shadow, but look closer at his eyes. He didn't choose this transformation out of malice or a thirst for power. He didn't wake up one morning craving the crown of thorns. Instead, he accepted a role that would haunt him forever. He became the villain so that the truth could finally be whispered in the ruins. Imagine a world where the old gods have sat on their gilded thrones for centuries, weaving a tapestry of comfortable lies while the foundation crumbled beneath your feet. To tear down those pillars, someone had to be willing to get their hands dirty. Someone had to become the villain in everyone else's story to shatter the illusions of the past. He stepped into that role because he knew the cost of silence was higher than the price of hatred. As the old gods crumble and their empires turn to dust, the fire of his actions provides the only light left. In the ash and the wreckage, the truth is finally being spoken, not by a hero, but by a man who sacrificed his soul to ensure the world could finally see clearly. Imagine standing in a room where the walls are constructed from lies, and every shadow hides a truth that was never meant for your eyes. You've been told certain stories are set in stone, but what if those narratives were engineered by hands you cannot see? You now hold the key to seeing through the myth. Most people walk through life believing they understand how influence works, but they are blind to the machinery operating behind the curtain. If you want to see how power manufactures monsters, how a system can take a human soul and forge it into a weapon of control, you have to look where others refuse to stare. Every empire, every regime, and every titan of industry leaves a trail of breadcrumbs in the dust of their conquests. They hide their tactics in plain sight, waiting for you to blink, but you won't blink, by choosing to stay. You are choosing to peel back the layers of deception that have governed our world for centuries. Subscribe to uncover more hidden truths in the shadows of history. We aren't just looking at the past, we are decoding the blueprint of the present. Each episode is a step deeper into the labyrinth, stripping away the propaganda until only the raw, uncomfortable truth remains. The door is open. The choice to see it is yours.